Hello, and welcome to SNA International's series on mass fatality response planning. This module is mass fatality morgue operations and why you should plan for such an operation in the event your jurisdiction experiences a mass fatality incident. My name is Frank Ciaccio. I'm a medical legal expert with SNA International. I will be narrating this module for you today. Well, what is a temporary morgue? It is important that the temporary facility should be functional no more than 48 to 72 hours after the incident. It is meant as a means to bring human remains to a facility where the identification information can be gathered and documented for comparison to the information collected from the families at the Family Assistance Center. The function of the temporary morgue are simple and are as follows. Collect postmortem data and document any information found on a human remains for identification purposes. For example, tattoos, body piercings, surgical marks, etc. Document any injuries or trauma to the bodies, determine cause of death, determine manner of death, determine if necessary the interval from the time of injury to death, and finally to recover any evidence that is located on the bodies. Well, who is responsible for the morgue? Regardless of the type of mass fatality incident you have encountered, the local medical examiner coroner has full jurisdiction over the morgue and recovery of human remains operations. Even if the federal government's assets and morgue are used, the local medical examiner is still the person in charge. Well, the difference between a non-legislative accident and a legislative accident is who pays for the morgue, equipment, supplies, and staffing. In a non-federal disaster declaration, it is the local and state authority that is responsible for covering all expenses. This can be extremely expensive and become a huge burden on the local and state resources. If it is a federal declaration disaster and a legislative NTSB accident, which is a commercial airline accident or rail accident, then federal assets become available. For example, the DMORT team and the DPMU, which is the Federal Disaster Portable Morgue Unit. Well, why should I have a temporary morgue? A common question is asked by many during the mass fatality response planning is why do I need or want to have a temporary morgue? Depending upon the size, scope, and location of the incident, it may be necessary to swiftly process the human remains, and the current morgue facility may not be large enough to handle the incident and normal workload operations simultaneously. Following a mass fatality, the medical examiner, coroner, must make the determination based upon the condition of the remains, the number of fatalities, and the magnitude of the disaster, whether to use a temporary morgue or not. It is important to keep in mind that in any disaster, there will still be normal day-to-day deaths that occur in your jurisdiction, and it is important to investigate those deaths as normal and not delay the work or investigation process of those deaths, or have them commingled with the disaster victim human remains. There are some medical examiner coroner facilities where the existing building is large enough, well-equipped, and well-staffed to handle the disaster and the day-to-day caseload at the same facility. Those situations are few and most jurisdictions cannot handle this. Therefore, every disaster plan needs to have a contingency for a temporary morgue and several possible locations identified. What should I consider in identifying a temporary morgue location? Temporary morgue is not a facility that you can easily construct without sufficient planning. The facility should be well thought out and must have several attributes in order for it to be sufficient and be able to adequately perform the task of processing human remains. When identifying a facility for a temporary morgue, you should look for either a warehouse, a military armory building, or an airport hangar. You should avoid and not consider any public buildings, schools, or ice rinks. Those facilities will have to be used after disaster, and having an image of a morgue is not ideal for public perception. Another key factor in searching for a temporary morgue is its location and distance to and from the incident site. This is extremely important in that you not want to travel a far distance with human remains from the incident site to the morgue. Also, you should consider the location of the morgue to the Family Assistance Center, or FAC. Under no circumstances should the morgue be located within close distance to the FAC. It is important that the family members know that there is a temporary morgue, but not one that they can see the operations ongoing. facility should be secured with limited and controlled access. Security is a main concern, and there should be limited access in and out of the building. Limited windows, and if all possible, a fenced area around the building to house refrigeration vehicles for storage of human remains. This is important in order to keep the media out so that the operations can remain private and dignified. These are examples of temporary morgue structures that have been or could potentially be used to house a temporary mortuary operation. The top left picture is the Carville Morgue facility located outside of New Orleans. This facility was constructed following Hurricane Katrina to be used for long-term processing of human remains. The second picture to the right is a military building being prepared as a morgue following an aviation crash. The advantage of using this building is that it is on a military base that is secured with control access in and out. Also, it contains a parking area surrounding the building to house the refrigeration trucks. The final picture on the bottom left is an airport hangar. This facility is ideal for an airplane crash in an airport. Again, well secured, large with limited viewing from the outside. The type of structure to consider. Careful consideration needs to be taken when looking for a temporary morgue facility. Not only must it be a non-public building, but it has to have specific requirements and facilities within the structure in order for it to work. Ideally, the building should be between 10,000 to 12,000 square feet in order to accommodate all the equipment and have sufficient working space at each station, regardless of the number of bodies. Temporary morgue can be set up and accommodated to any size that is available, but it is best to have as much room as you possibly can. The facility needs to have hot and cold running water, 110 and 220 volt electricity, air conditioning, heating, and working restrooms. The floor should be non-porous, preferably concrete. Avoid wood floors if at all possible. If there are several empty offices within the building, that is ideal as well. These offices are used for records management, information management, and storage of files. This is an example of a layout for a temporary morgue. Keep in mind that the morgue can be displayed in any configuration possible. It must work best for you and the operation. Depending upon the condition of the human remains, the temporary morgue, at a minimum, should have the following stations: admitting, triage assessment, photography and personal effects, pathology, radiology, anthropology, dental, fingerprints, and a DNA station. If there is room and it is necessary, you can have a station for embalming and casketing. However, most of the time, these body preparation procedures are prepared by the funeral director at his or her funeral home. Well, are you prepared? Do you have a plan that all participants can follow? Have you identified the following: the location for a temporary morgue, who your stakeholders are, what their roles and responsibilities are, who is in charge of the operation, what are the operational tasks and the personnel that will be used to fulfill those tasks, and most importantly, who is financially responsible. One should always be prepared for the inevitable. Today, local and state jurisdictions are becoming more and more responsible for handling large-scale disasters in their jurisdictions that at one time were handled by the federal government. The federal government is not always going to be there, at least in the first 72 hours of the disaster, so you must be prepared and ready. Every local and state jurisdiction should have written into their mass fatality plans requirements for a temporary morgue facility in the event one needs to be located. If you had answered no to one or more of the questions in the previous slide, know that SNA International can help. Again, this is just one of the series of modules regarding mass fatality response planning. I encourage you to watch all the modules. Thank you for your time.